Some moments in history force the world to stop, watch, and ask, how did we get here? Today, Gaza has become more than another headline. It's a case study in how the intersection of war, technology, economic strategy, and humanitarian action can create a crisis that holds global consequences. What we're witnessing is not just the collapse of a region, it's a warning to humanity about the ultimate costs when geopolitics, money, and technology collide. But buried beneath the breaking news and the images of devastation are deeper forces at play. What are they? And could understanding them help us stop the next disaster before it begins? Picture this. More than 428,000 people, almost 500,000, forced from their homes in a matter of weeks. 1 in 5 Gazans now faces starvation. In a region where daily life was already difficult, the past months have unleashed a level of suffering that experts say is unprecedented and possibly unparalleled in recent memory. And yet the world's response is not only political or military, it's logistical, technological, and economic. So how did Gaza reach this boiling point? To understand, let's take a crash course on the roots of this crisis. The headlines only show the tip of a much larger iceberg. For years, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has simmered, but in May 2025, it erupted into a new phase. Israeli ground operations and airstrikes, launched on May 18th, have resulted in at least 103 deaths in the opening days, including children. The total death toll for Palestinians, just since March, is already over 2,545. As of early May, 59 Israelis and foreign nationals remain captive, while attacks and counterattacks continue to ripple across the border. The humanitarian impact of these military decisions is staggering. Families are fleeing their neighborhoods, often carrying only the belongings they can fit in a bag. Schools, long seen as sanctuaries, are now among the very places being bombed. 14 separate attacks on educational facilities have been recorded since the ceasefire broke down. More than 90% of households are facing water shortages. The vast majority report their drinking water is dangerously degraded. In some areas, taps run dry for days, forcing children to scavenge for muddy puddles. Even the simplest routines, cooking, bathing, sleeping, have become daily struggles for survival. International organizations are sounding the alarm at unprecedented decibels. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has called Israel's recent actions a policy of siege and starvation, denouncing them as a mockery of international law. Catherine Russell, UNICEF's executive director, described the tragedy in clear, chilling words. Children are facing the worst humanitarian crisis since October 2023. And in a grave warning, Volker Turk, the UN's human rights chief, cautioned that Israel's reported plans to forcibly transfer Gaza's population aggravate concerns that its actions aim to make life incompatible with continued existence in Gaza. But behind these stark numbers and quotes are complex systems pulling the strings. Algorithms deciding who gets food, drones tracking aid convoys from the sky, entire populations forced to register through digital checkpoints before gaining access to shelter or water. In May, at least 55 humanitarian organizations united to condemn new Israeli registration requirements, arguing these digital controls are deliberately hindering life-saving operations. In a digital age, paperwork and data can become as powerful as bombs. The situation is fluid, volatile, and, at times, utterly overwhelming. Yet for many on the ground, it boils down to a single question: will the next truck of aid make it through? Let's zoom out for a moment. Gaza has long been a region at the intersection of ancient grievances and 21st century technology. Since the late 20th century, its people have lived under blockade and constant threat. International aid groups, journalists, and even local entrepreneurs have struggled to maintain basic infrastructure, much of it now coordinated by software, mobile devices, and satellite networks. Money flows into and out of Gaza not only through banks, but also through digital currencies, cash transfers by cell phone app, and sometimes even smuggled flash drives. Yet when the conflict reignited in 2025, every system in this tightly wound web began to unravel. Communications blackouts, sometimes targeted, sometimes the result of infrastructure destruction, left entire neighborhoods cut off for days. Emergency medical teams used WhatsApp and encrypted messaging just to coordinate patient transport, as traditional lines failed. Aid trucks, monitored by satellite and algorithm, rerouted endlessly around bombed bridges or newly set checkpoints. In some cases, critical deliveries sat just kilometers away, restricted by digital denial of access. And then, the economic squeeze set in. Gaza's markets, already battered by years of blockade, virtually collapsed. With supplies limited and demand exploding, the prices of basic necessities like flour, diapers, and bottled water soared hundreds of %. For those with a few dwindling shekels, the daily question wasn't which brand to buy, but whether anything remained to buy at all. Meanwhile, the rest of the world watched, debated, and, some would argue, bickered. The UN and major NGOs lobbied for open corridors and accountability, warning that without urgent action, the death toll would climb still higher. Global media cycled between images of child victims and heated debates about sovereignty, terrorism, and proportional response. But in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley and the offices of international banks, another battle played out. Who would fund the next round of humanitarian technology? Which cloud company could keep servers running as bombs fell? Could digital ID systems designed for refugees be trusted in a landscape where every data point could be weaponized? Let's take a step back to the core of the crisis. The collapse of Gaza's aid and economic networks didn't just happen overnight. It's the result of years, if not decades, of technological experimentation and economic policy shaped by conflict. The region's dependence on outside aid, strict controls over cross-border flows, and digital innovation fueled by necessity have created a fragile, tech-dependent ecosystem. In theory, these tools were meant to make life better. In reality, as the war worsened, they became both lifelines and instruments of control. Consider, for example, the registration systems now required by Israeli authorities. In May 2025, as the military offensive expanded, Gazans seeking humanitarian aid or shelter were often told to register digitally, sometimes via smartphone apps, sometimes at hastily erected checkpoints with biometric scanners. Humanitarian groups warned that such measures didn't just slow down aid, they put vulnerable families at risk, flagged them for future targeting, and in some cases, resulted in people being turned away altogether. What's more, aid convoys, already subject to physical checkpoints and airspace restrictions, were now being tracked and sometimes blocked by algorithmic decision-making. If a convoy hadn't cleared a digital hurdle, maybe a missing database entry for a driver, or an unapproved route on a satellite map, it might be forced to go back or wait indefinitely. For thousands of Gazans waiting in makeshift camps, this could mean days or weeks without fresh food, clean water, or emergency medicine. The economic fallout has been just as severe. The destruction of infrastructure combined with data-driven restrictions on trade meant that many local businesses, especially those relying on imports or digital payments, were simply unable to operate. Cash dried up, and with power outages, even digital transactions became impossible. The result? A dangerous feedback loop of scarcity, inflation, and desperation. It's tempting to see Gaza's crisis as a purely local or even regional conflict. Yet the underlying dynamics ripple far beyond its borders. Global food prices are affected when a region that once exported agricultural goods can no longer produce. International aid budgets, already stretched thin by crises in Ukraine, Sudan, and elsewhere, are now buckling under new demands. Tech companies that once sold humanitarian IoT solutions or blockchain-powered ID systems now face a crossroads: continue doing business in a war zone or pull out and risk being accused of complicity. All the while, politics, both local and global, adds fuel to the fire. The Israeli government, defending its actions as necessary for national security, faces accusations of disproportionate force and collective punishment. Palestinians and their supporters demand international accountability, branding the blockade and digital restrictions as a new form of siege warfare. In diplomatic circles, talk of a two-state solution is revived, but many experts warn that without concrete action, this could remain just talk. In this evolving crisis, the role of technology has become both a beacon of hope and a tool of oppression. Every drone flight, every digital checkpoint, every AI-powered monitoring system offers the possibility of greater efficiency, but also greater control. Humanitarian organizations, once slow to adopt new technologies, now find themselves caught between saving lives and protecting the digital privacy and security of those they serve. Amidst this chaos, the stakes continue to rise. The humanitarian system itself, already battered by donor fatigue and chronic underfunding, faces the prospect of being replaced or outpaced by private sector innovation. But at what cost? Who decides which lives are worth saving and which data is too dangerous to collect? As we close in on the second half of this story, the questions intensify. The future of Gaza hangs in the balance. Will the conflict spiral further out of control? Could a fragile ceasefire bring about lasting negotiations? or is a full-scale occupation, with even greater human cost, now inevitable? And perhaps most urgently, in a world where lines between humanitarianism, technology, and economic power have all but disappeared, do we have the tools and the will to break the cycle? Or are we witnessing the dawn of a new kind of crisis, one where the very systems meant to save us become the engines of catastrophe? As we stand at this crossroads, the world's eyes are fixed on Gaza. The crisis has reached a point where every decision, every delay, and every technological experiment can tip the scales between survival and catastrophe. But what comes next? Let's look ahead, piecing together the likely futures and the consequences each might bring. Imagine a world where the current trajectory simply continues. Israeli operations intensify, and Hamas responds with sporadic attacks. International agencies call for aid, but digital registration rules and border controls choke the flow. The people of Gaza, battered by displacement and deprivation, face mounting hunger and disease. UNICEF's Catherine Russell has warned that children are facing the worst humanitarian crisis since October 2023. If trends persist, 1 in 5 Gazans could slip from hunger into famine, and the very infrastructure that sustains life, water, healthcare, electricity, may vanish altogether for thousands. But that's not the only possible future. A fragile ceasefire could emerge, perhaps brokered under immense international pressure. In this scenario, humanitarian corridors might open, and some aid could reach the most desperate. Yet even this stability would be shockingly brittle. Ceasefires in Gaza have historically collapsed under the weight of mistrust, new provocations, or political shifts. Every day of calm would feel like a countdown to the next eruption, with children going to sleep in fear that tomorrow could bring fresh violence. A third path looms, one that haunts policymakers and civilians alike. Should a full-scale Israeli occupation occur, as some warn, Gaza might face not just instability, but a long-term humanitarian disaster. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has cautioned that Israel's reported plans to forcibly transfer Gaza's population aggravate concerns that its actions aim to make life incompatible with continued existence in Gaza. In this scenario, hundreds of thousands could be forced to relocate, with international law and diplomatic norms stretched to their limits. There is also the specter of regional escalation. Any move perceived as occupation or ethnic cleansing could ignite protests and clashes far beyond Gaza's borders, pulling in neighboring states and potentially destabilizing the entire Middle East. Yet amid these grim scenarios, there are glimmers of opportunity, if world leaders and their publics are willing to seize them. Technology, wielded thoughtfully, could be a game changer. Secure, transparent digital aid tracking can prevent diversion and ensure that food and medicine reach the intended recipients. Satellite imagery and real-time data analytics can help relief organizations identify the hardest-hit communities in days instead of weeks. If these tools are used to facilitate rather than restrict humanitarian access, the impact could save lives. But, as recent months have shown, the same technologies can be, and already are, used for surveillance, exclusion, and political leverage. The line between help and harm is razor thin. International policy is equally double-edged. Coordinated sanctions, if targeted carefully, could pressure actors to open aid routes or halt attacks on civilians. A broad coalition, uniting the UN, regional powers, and even unlikely partners, could enforce a ceasefire or draft a new peace framework. Yet, each intervention carries risks. Sanctions often hurt the vulnerable more than the powerful. Peacekeepers can find themselves caught in the crossfire, and ambitious diplomatic efforts risk unraveling if even one major player defects or changes priorities. So, what lessons can we draw, not just for governments and NGOs, but for everyone watching this crisis unfold? First, the Gaza crisis is not just a tragedy, it's a test. It challenges our assumptions about technology, morality, and global governance. Our faith in technological solutions is fragile. We see now that apps and digital IDs, hailed as tools to combat fraud, can also be used to exclude those most in need. The push for efficiency must never override the right to basic dignity. When you see headlines about drones or blockchain in crisis zones, remember to ask, who is really benefiting? Who is being left behind? Second, the spiral of violence and humanitarian collapse is not inevitable. History is full of surprising turns, unexpected breakthroughs, innovative diplomacy, grassroots resilience. Expert observers remind us that the choices made in foreign capitals and local councils alike can swing the outcome. As UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres recently put it, siege and starvation are a mockery of international law. The world must not look away. What can you, as a viewer half a world away, actually do? It can feel overwhelming, facing a crisis measured in thousands of lives, complex geopolitics, and digital tools you may never use. But information itself is power. Share credible updates. Challenge misinformation, so rampant in this war, fed by both human bias and automated bots. Support reputable relief organizations, not just in moments of headline-driven drama, but over the long haul, when attention has shifted elsewhere and needs remain acute. You can also let your voice reach farther than you think. Pressure on elected leaders matters. History shows that policy shifts often reflect public outrage and sustained demand. If your country is involved as a mediator, donor, or arms supplier, hold your officials accountable. Write, call, and vote. These small acts, in aggregate, have changed policy before and can again. Most of all, reflect on the kind of world you want to live in. The fate of Gaza is not just a regional story, it's a window into the global order of the 21st century. If humanitarian law can be set aside here, it can be elsewhere. If digital systems can decide who eats and who goes hungry in Gaza, they can do so in the next crisis, maybe closer to home. The lesson is universal. Technology and policy are never neutral, and every line of code or law carries real human consequences. In closing, let's return to the question that began this journey. Can technology and policy break the cycle of Gaza's suffering, or are we on the cusp of an even deeper catastrophe? The sobering truth is that neither technology nor policy alone will save Gaza. Both can be forces for good or ill. What matters, and what history will judge, is how they are used, who is included in decisions, and whether compassion is allowed to guide innovation and law. The cycle can be broken, but only if technology is placed in the service of humanity, and political will is summoned to protect, not punish, the vulnerable. Here's a secret fact that gets little attention. Some of the most effective humanitarian interventions in Gaza over the past decade have come not from governments or big tech, but from small local networks. Volunteers using encrypted messaging to coordinate food drops, teachers running underground schools, doctors improvising clinics with what little they have. These stories rarely make headlines, but they are proof that agency and resilience persist even in the darkest times. If empowered with the right tools and support, these local actors could be the real agents of change. So, as the headlines shift and the world's attention inevitably drifts, don't tune out. Dig deeper. Ask uncomfortable questions. Demand accountability from leaders, from technologists, from yourself. If you found this story insightful, share it, because awareness is the first line of defense against both apathy and propaganda. Subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most complex issues, and tell us in the comments, what role should technology play in future humanitarian crises? Can we harness it for good, or does it too often become another tool of control? Remember, what happens in Gaza matters to all of us. The decisions made there about war and peace, technology and trust will echo far beyond its borders. Let's work together so that those echoes are ones of hope, not despair.